All right. So yes, our first we have two show and tell today. Tim and oh, Pete's not here. He called in sick. So just one
Oh,
show and tell, Pete. And then layout tour um, is Steve Bradley. Steve. All right, I always forget to close that window, and I get feedback. I don't know if you guys do. Okay. So our layout tour is Steve Bradley, Southern Pacific Railroad Minus Subdivision, and Robin Becker is our clinician today. JMRI, what is it and what it does. So I'm looking for Tim for show and tell.
There he is.
Okay, Tim. All right, you're up.
All righty. Let me share this screen here. There we go. Come on. Okay, I was converting a, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes.
Loud and clear, thank you.
Bye.
All right. I was converting a Proto 2000 that I had sitting around amongst all the other stuff I have. It's a lifelike. There's no Walters mentioned on it, so it's a little bit older, I guess. I think I paid $60 for it. It's a Alco PA, and I was converting to DCC, and so I had to dive. I've done conversions in the a couple conversions in the past, but it's been a while, and I had to dive into the issue of dealing with what kind of speakers am I going to use, and there wasn't much room on it. And so I needed to find a small speaker for it, and then I watched some videos that were very inspiring. One was a NMRA video from, I think, NMRAX, the NMRX series. And that's excellent. I have a link to that later. I'll get to you. And anyhow, starting in, so I just have some simple basics. Maybe, a lot of you probably know all this, but I bet there's quite a few people who don't.
not found guilty in the Senate.
We have a political announcement. If you didn't know it, it's critical when you install a speaker that the speaker has an enclosure. Otherwise, the speaker puts out sound in two directions, and they are phased differently. So the sounds coming out of the front side of the speaker will cancel the ones coming out of the back of the speaker. And that's why you want an enclosure. Bruce Petrarca has a whole video on that, which is very good. You can just look it up on YouTube and find it. Once you get the closure on the speaker, or before that, actually, you got to figure out what speaker you want. And the latest thing are sugar cube speakers. And I call the other ones standard speakers, the ones we've used for a long time, which are usually a little bigger than the sugar cube speakers. And the advantage of the sugar cubes is space. Sometimes, like this Pro 2000 model didn't have much space on it. And so I had to get something fairly small. And when I watched the video, which is now on YouTube, it was part of the, I guess that's Zoom that they use for NMRA. She showed a demonstration of the actually of the Apple 4S speaker, which is like a sugar cube speaker, and comes out of an Apple 4S phone. These are pretty prevalent. I noticed, I just checked on Amazon, and Amazon has them for about $7. She said that they could get them to you for $3 or $4. I don't know if that's still still their price. But the difference in the clarity of sound over the regular speakers was pretty pronounced. Though I would think that if you do have space, you might still consider one of the standard speakers because there's other aspects. It can have a fuller sound and maybe a better bass than the Apple IVs speakers. But what you want to really do is you want to dive, before picking a speaker, you want to dive into this and watch some of these videos and come up with your own opinion about which is the best speaker. One of the problems with the 4S is you may have to, it comes in this weird plastic package, and she actually cut parts of that package off. So, for space purposes, I guess, to conserve space. And then one of the real hard things is you got to solder the leads on. Apparently that's not so easy on those. Let's see here. You also, when you install a speaker or when you buy a speaker, you need to be aware of the output of your decoder. Most decoders put out 1 watt on their amplifier of sound. Don't ask me what that all means. Smarter people like Robin probably understand what that all means, but it's a watt of sound. And if you put out too many watts, you can blow the speaker out. One way to fix that is to adjust your master volume on your decoder, which would just be, you get the manual from your manufacturer on your manufacturer's website, which is probably a PDF file, and you can find that master volume CV, and it's probably pretty easy to do that, to adjust it. Most decoders require an 8-ohm speaker. If you have room for 2 speakers, there are ways to wire them to keep within the specs. And if as you look for information on speakers online, they'll show you diagrams of how to set up 2 speakers together if you get into that situation. These speakers, for your home use, a single speaker puts out plenty of sound. You don't always need 2. Now, if you're a real audiophile and you want super clarity or whatever, you might want to look into two speakers. You could throw one into a dummy engine that's connected to your regular engine, connected together there. Note that the new Tsunami 2 decoders put out 2 watts of sound, so you have to deal with that. That might mean just lowering the master volume, in half, cutting it in half. Or there's ways to wire up a couple of speakers together for 2 watts. You may find a speaker that's 8 ohms that handles 2 watts. I don't know if I've seen many of those. Okay, this is my favorite speaker. Is one that actually Bruce Petrarca didn't like in his review, and I have a link to his review, and I highly recommend reading his review. He's really excellent on this stuff. And that is an 8-ohm speaker by Railmaster Hobbies. If you're not familiar with Railmaster Hobbies, they're up in the LA area, and their specialty are speakers. Reed's Hobby carries their speakers. The other day, I decided I wanted to buy 4 of these, and I called up Reed's, and they had 8 of them in stock. So I think now they only have 4, so you better hurry, or you might be fighting people over speakers if you like these. I like these. They're small. They're 1.5 inch by 1/2, and they're already in an enclosure, so you don't have to build the enclosure for it. Which is, I'm paying. I guess I could go the Apple IVs route. And save some money, but it takes time to build the enclosure, and it takes time to solder the leads on. This comes with the leads already soldered on and an enclosure. And the Reeds, and buying it from Reeds makes good sense because he gives you a 10% discount for being an NMRA member, and there's no shipping fees because Railmaster will sell this at their retail price, $12.95. Okay, this is how I did an installation. How I did the installation on the Alco PA. When I install a DCC decoder on an old DC engine, a lot of times there will be a little circuit board in there that controls the lighting usually. And the first thing I do is just get rid of that. Don't try to keep that. You know, there'll be an this had an 8-pin plug that, you know, so you could just plug in a decoder. Ignore that. Get rid of all that stuff and start from scratch, because the decoder you have is going to produce much better lighting effects than what they had installed back in the old days there with their legacy stuff. And then the next step is to create a platform for the decoder. The only space I had available was, here's my pointer, was this little area in the back of the decoder. There was a tiny little dip in here up over in this area, and the rest of it is all taken up. The Proto 2000 weighs over a pound. It's a lot of weight, which is nice. So anyhow, I didn't have a lot of room to work with. I cut a hole in it. There's two ways to go. You can have the speaker go up through if you have a vent. And some people, you know, alter the vent, I guess, to get the sound to go up. Instead of that, I just went down. There was an opening in the chassis below this platform I made out of a piece of styrene. And then I cut an opening just for the speaker area right there. And I used an economy. There's the economy, right? Oops, shoot, sorry. Okay. And then there it is all installed. And there's the speaker turned upside down. And then these are the additional resources. I'll put them on. Here's Bruce Petrakis. He did he was a regular at Model Railroad Hobbyist. And then I think this was his very last article. I don't know, he may have done a few later, but for his regular articles, this was his last article on the speakers. And it's an excellent comprehensive article on various speakers. And then the video I was talking about, the NMRA video, was by Kaylee Zing, who's an engineer, I think in the aerospace industry. So she kind of knows what she's talking about. And that's on YouTube, and I'll post these links on our chat thing here on Zoom. And I'm gonna try one last thing. Do I have time? Okay, Ryan, I just wanted to play a 1-minute video.
For you, anything.
Oh man, you're a gentleman and a scholar. Okay, let me get out of here and get this up. And I have no idea if this will work. Can you see the train there?
We still have your PowerPoint.
Oh, it's a PowerPoint. Oh, okay. I didn't select PowerPoint. Maybe I'll have to skip this. What do I do here?
You could do a new share, or you could stop your share and start over.
Okay, let me let's see here.
Yeah, you have to unshare and reshare.
Okay, I'm trying to get my
I'm gonna stop your share.
oh,
There
there
you
we go. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
That helps. And share screen. And there we go. Share. There we go. Can you see that?
There it is.
Yep, there it is.
Okay. There we go. This is the sound. This is from a Android phone, so it may
Did
not
you
be
click
super
the
clear.
little? Did you click the boxes that says share sound?
Oh no, but it's a video.
Yeah, we won't be able to hear it unless you click those boxes at the bottom of the share screen. So if you didn't, you have to drop it down and try again. Go ahead.
Okay.
Otherwise, it'll be silent,
All righty.
which doesn't go with a speaker presentation.
Can you bring my share thing back up? I don't know.
Oh man.
There, okay.
There we
There
go.
we go. There we go. Good. Okay. Share computer sound. There we
There we
go.
can hear that.
got it. Thank
And the
you.
video one too, if you're doing a video. There's two checks there.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
All right. And then,
Well, that's exciting. Oh, there it is.
okay. Can you hear it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Very nice, Tim.
Okay, and that's it.
Wow.
Thanks for listening.
Did the was it the elephants? Did they have trouble getting the elephants all to go away?
Oh yeah, that was a rhinoceros.
A
Yeah.
rhinoceros. That's
The
what it
rhinos.
was.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that was a
We
Christmas
cleared
time.
them
So.
out. I got the tax squad out there and they cleared them out.
All right, I am going to introduce to you Steve Bradley for an awesome layout tour of the Southern Pacific Railroad and Mina subdivision.
Go to share screen here. Can you guys see my desktop?
Yes, we can see it. You have your Zoom window open. Oh, there we go.
Yes.
There's pictures.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to take you to an area of the country that I model in the desert Southwest. Not a lot of people know about this region or remember this region of the Southern Pacific Railroad. The Southern Pacific purchased a narrow gauge railroad from the Virginia and Truckee in 1900. And this is over here on this map. This is the Virginia and Truckee, one of the most profitable short lines in the country. Most of our silver came out of the Comstock right here. This is Lake Tahoe, and this is the eastern border of California and Nevada right here. So the Southern Pacific purchased this line in 1900, and about 2 months after they purchased it, right here in Tonopah, they discovered gold. This was the last major gold rush in the continental United States, here at Tonopah and subsequently at another town right off map over in this area called Goldfield. And the only way to get that ore out was over the now Southern Pacific Railroad line in through Mina. Mina was the hub of the northern end of the narrow gauge railroad, and there was so much traffic in this area that they actually standard gauged this line and created this cutoff to hasten to the overland route right here. That's this line right here. That's the Transcontinental Railroad right there. So subsequently, we found a lot of traffic that went through this area, and it was extremely profitable for the Southern Pacific. In fact, in 6 weeks, they made their money on the traffic that was going over the line from the purchase that they did to the Virginia and Truckee, much to the Virginia and Truckee's chagrin. So we're going to concentrate a little bit on Mina here, maybe. Try it again.
Ooh, circle of
There it
death.
goes. There we go. Clicked on it too many times. This map here was originally drawn up by the Southern Pacific. Mina was a half-mile long yard, 7 tracks, had an 11-stall engine house, had a transfer trestle similar to the one that many have seen in Oweno at the south end of the line, where they parked narrow gauge hopper cars over the top and dumped them into standard gauge gondolas down below. And they had this huge Y, dual gauge Y to turn steam engines right here. So this was quite a large facility that has been all but forgotten on the Southern Pacific. From this point and with this information, I ended up designing a layout that unfortunately I have barely a 10 by 10 foot room. So my layout room is a lot smaller than most people that has layouts. And it's a point-to-point layout. So I have a Mina yard over in here. and I have a peninsula that does a wraparound over under, and it comes back along the wall, and then there's a flip up Y over here to turn steam engines at this end, with the turntable at the engine facility to turn engines at the opposite end. So this is the layout that I ended up designing approximately 8 years ago, 9 years ago now. So with
Very
that,
nice.
we're going to go to what it really looked like. This is a photo taken by Gerald Best in 1935. We're looking north along the main line in Mina. You can see that there's quite an expansive desert area here. Downtown Mina is over here on the left, and mostly dual gauge tracks are in the yard. This is a dual gauge train getting ready to head south. These are narrow gauge or standard gauge boxcars rather, and a narrow gauge boxcar and gondolas over here. With all the steam coming off this engine, you can't see the other 3 or 4 tracks that are over in this area here. But the interesting part about this photo is that you're starting to see some of the structures that they built in the Mina area. And hold on a second, thumbnails, there we go. And Gerald walked over to the engine house, got up on the engine house roof. These are the leads to the engine house. And now you can start to see some of the very distinctive structures that were in Mina. Right here is the ice house with its very broad eaves. And over in here is the 2-story custom Southern Pacific station that was built in 1905, 1906. They spent a lot of money on this station, beautiful station, which you'll see in a minute. And all has been lost to time. There's very little of this, nothing of this rail yard is left in Mina, and all the rail structures have been taken down. So going from the existing, we go to the layout. This is looking down my Mina yard. I have a flip-up section right here that allows me to get standard gauge trains from the standard gauge side of the yard over to the narrow gauge side of the yard. This is a scratch-built Southern Pacific 2-story station. I made that model with a lot of photos that I was able to find and some information about the size from a Sanborn map. The station itself is about 5% smaller than the actual size, so that it fit on my layout. Moving down through the yard, you come down to the engine facility. This is scratch-built gravity-fed oil derrick here. And there's a pump house right behind here. This is a precision scale brass tank. It's about 38,000 gallon tank in scale. That's half the size of the real tank that was there. They had almost 70,000 gallon water tank in Mina. There's a lot of engines that they serviced, and it just didn't fit on the layout size-wise. This is a scratch-built frost box underneath here. And then back here is a scratch-built Mina ice house. And that I was able to build after I pulled up a bunch of photos. And believe it or not, most of this building is still there. It's now being used as a firehouse, but I was able to count siding boards and get some footprint sizes to recreate this very distinctive looking building with the very, very large overhangs used to shade the sidewalls of the ice house itself. Here's number 18. As some of you maybe know, they've rebuilt number 18 in Independence, California. And for a while, number 18 was running on the Durango and Silverton last year. I'm sorry, in 2019. And it's now back in Independence. This model is a brass model. It's approximately 55 years old. It's been completely reconditioned, has DCC sound, a capacitor, all the fun stuff that really makes it work to today's standards. Moving on through the yard, you come down to the engine facility. You're going to see a turntable here. This turntable is a kit from the United Kingdom. It went together really, really well, but it was never in Mina. You remember, Mina was in the open desert, and they had all the space in the world to do a large Y and create however many tracks they wanted in their yard. The 11-stall engine house became a 2-stall engine house. I have a third rip track over here. This would be about 1938, since there's an SW1 sitting in here. I have seen SW1s in old black and white photos in the late 30s in Mina. So I use this to move my standard gauge around mostly, as it's one of the shortest engines. I was going to use an 060, but I have one of those, but even they're very, very large in standard gauge for this layout. I also want to stop right now and talk a little bit about the backdrop. This backdrop took me hours to find online, and it is of an area not exactly in southern Nevada. It's southwestern Colorado and Rifle, Colorado. But as the crow flies, it's not real far away from where this is. So I really thought this helped the layout a lot, and it makes the layout room feel a lot bigger than it is. Moving along, my next modeling opportunity was going to be Mount Montgomery. This is a picture from 1941, after this portion of the line had been abandoned for a year. And it also shows a distinctive addition that was made on the back of the station. Originally, there was a shed roof on the back of this. And then this is a boxcar on the ground. It was the bunkhouse for the people that were operating the station. And so from that, I scratch built this station right here with that shed roof in the back. It's in operation right now. So I have an order board here. I'll zoom in for you so you can see it. Got a train order board here, guys going into the office. Got the Western Union sign on it. This is not a semaphore. This is an order board. This was used to notify engineers as they're making their approach to Mount Montgomery, the highest point on the Southern Pacific Railroad, that if there was a snow problem or something like that. There's a wellhead right here and a storage building right there. Kind of gives you a little bit of the flavor of what was going on out here in the middle of nowhere, Mount Montgomery. From that point, I'm looking just a little bit different angle. We can see the entrance to the Mount Montgomery Tunnel. This distance from this tunnel portal to that face right there on the real line was about 2 miles. But as with most of us, we have to decompress our layouts so that we can fit them into a room. So there's 2 miles right there. There's a telltale as you approach this tunnel. I've never seen any pictures of telltales, but my friend Dave Garcia, who also passed last year, we had a long conversation about telltales. And he said that he had seen them on the line. He had ridden the line as a child, and actually knew that the north end of the tunnel had a wood frame telltale, and the south end of the tunnel had a metal framed one. This is my Mount Montgomery with a light dusting of snow. I used this and modeled this to match the backdrop a little bit, to give it a little bit of scenery. And then popping out the other side, you start to drop into California. There's the metal frame telltale here. And this is the lonely part of the railroad. This is, there's not much going on here human-wise except for the rail line itself. You might even see some bighorn sheep in the area. I put them up along the ridge line there so that you can see them. These abutments are carved out of balsa foam. They are sealed with gesso and then painted with a latex paint. If you've ever used balsa foam, it's very, very easy to carve, and you can create a lot of really neat shapes with it. This is cast plaster, and it has a capital on top of it, very similar to the way the SP built their tunnel under Mount Montgomery, which was really there. So moving along, you get to see a little bit more of that lonely railroad. The Southern Pacific, when they built this railroad, actually the Virginia and Truckee, when they built it, they did a lot of dry stack retaining walls along the line. I've been out there and I've walked a lot of the line and seen it. In many places along the railroad, you'll see these dry stack retaining walls with available a rock that was in the area. This is all foam, rigid foam that has plaster applied over it with rock castings applied over that. And then obviously various levels of paint and sand and rock have been on it as well. One of the reasons I put these bighorn sheep up here along the ridge line was because when I put them on the layout, you can't see them. They blend in just like the real guys do. So there's one right there. Moving farther down, another feature that you find along this part of the railroad is a lot of volcanic activity. Cinder cones, lava fields are very, very prevalent in the Owens Valley. There are some farther north, but there's a lot of historic turbulence that has occurred in the earth here. And I wanted to honor that on this layout. So you're not going to see many layouts with cinder cones on them. So here's your best shot right here. This lava rock came from the Owens Valley. I crushed it up and put it into the layout. So it turned out really nice. Here's a track crew here cleaning rock away from the edge of the layout. And there's actually some signage in here, which is very typical to the Southern Pacific. They installed these signs, which there's some black and white pictures that show them right in that area there. And then here's a nice little hand car kit that I built with a little hand car spur off the side. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask at any point. Moving along, this is kind of a unique shot over the ridge looking at Mina, Nevada, miles away. But what I like to show about this shot is a couple of things. One, yeah, there's that bighorn sheep that gets lost in the scenery. But even more to the point is this rock right here. This rock came from the Owens Valley, and it shows the variation of color from the rose and beige colors to the very, very whitish tan colors. I use this rock as my basis to paint this layout, especially in this area. I've done that also in some of the other areas as well. There's 4 to 5 different colors. Oh, hold on a second. I knew this was going to happen.
Little AC.
Yeah. Thought about it when I was setting this up. Okay, more power. There's about 4 or 5 different coats of paint on this layout. It's been dry brushed many times. This color here was mixed on a paint can lid and splashed into the layout. Rocks were added from the local area, sand, gravel, and some rocks as well, larger boulders in this scale. Now we come down to the end of the peninsula, and this is where State Line is. State Line was marked on the real railroad by a stone obelisk with carved in one side were the letters California, and on the opposite side, the letters Nevada. That obelisk I actually found at Carson City at the Nevada State Railroad Museum. That's where it ended up. And I walked around a corner and there it was. And I went, I know exactly where that came from. So it's nice to know that somebody saved it. On the opposite side of the rail line was just standard rail signage that said, yeah, this is the line. It was a big photo opportunity, and there's a lot of black and whites that show steam trains stopped in this location. Some wild donkeys are over in here. Again, you see a dry stack retaining wall. In this case, these are lava rocks, and then a railroad retaining wall, as you see right there. Moving on, this is the central part of my layout. This is an operational layout. I run switch lists. They average about 2 hours, sometimes 2.5. In the central part of the layout is this opportunity to move cars in and out. So we've got a spur line that comes in here with a runaround. You've got a couple of beehive charcoal ovens right here, which are also found in the Owens Valley. There's a loading ramp right here, a tram building, overhead tram system, and the like. Now, most of this is all at modeler's discretion. Queen was a siding with a water tank, and that was pretty much it. So my Queen mine area is a lot more involved. So I have an ore bin with a tram house. This was not in Queen, but I took a little modeler's license to create it here. These are scratch-built ore cars on a Blackstone flat car base that really give the flavor of these hand-loaded cars, or hand-unloaded cars anyway. Here is a picture from Saline of the tram that went from the Saline Valley to the rail line. I brought this in as an original photo because you can see the amount of distance that they use. This tram actually went over this ridge, down into that valley, and up over that ridge, and down into the Saline Valley to get the salt that they transported to the railhead. Unfortunately, it didn't operate for very long, but it was quite a construction. This is my tram system. This is a Berkshire Valley kit that has been modified to fit onto the layout. I scratch built a second tower at half size and use that as force perspective as you look along this tram line. These buckets right here, Duncan 3D cast for me as half-size buckets to the original Berkshire Valley ones, which you can see in this area right here. Here is the loading dock at Queen, and instead of a water tank, I have a water column to a water line that goes to a water tank off the layout. It just didn't fit on the layout. So this is the section house at Queen, pretty compressed to the lower tunnel. There was only one tunnel at Mount Montgomery, but because I have an over and under, obviously I ended up with two. And when I built these tunnels, I used the Chooch blasted rock and cut it into 3 panels, 2 sidewalls and a roof. And that's, it's about 4 or 5 inches wide, the panel, but it's more than enough to give the feeling of walking in or going into a blasted rock tunnel. Again, here's that balsa foam side panels and plaster tunnel. So as we come out the other side, we come to pretty much the end of the scenery that I've done in this area. But we come into Benton, and this is Benton, California. Again, you can see the backdrop with the different levels of depth, which really help to give the illusion of a much bigger space. That abutment right there on this original photo is what I used at the base to create some of the abutments on this side of the Mount Montgomery range. This is actually a kit, one of the only kits that I have on this layout that was found, and I put it together. It's a typical Carson and Colorado station, which became an SP station on this line when SP bought it. The shack right here I built is also a kit, and I built that shack because of this photo right here. This is one of the only photos that I have of Benton, California, when it was under control of the Carson and Colorado / Virginia and Truckee. It needed a little bit of paint here, and when the SP bought the line, this would get painted in the SP colors. That shack right there was the inspiration for the shack in the photo that you saw. This mule team right here more than likely was carrying firewood or some type of wood to Bodie. Benton was the closest rail point to Bodie, which was very early on one of the largest cities in Nevada. Bodie would be used as a connection point for almost the entire time. They would have to go by wagon to the Boney and Benton Railway, which was about 15, 20 miles away at this point. And then there is my station, which kind of matches the picture that I found. Gives you a little bit of an idea of what this area looked like once upon a time. Moving south from Benton, we come to the Benton Stockyards. The interesting thing about this photo is, again, in the backdrop, you see these electrical towers. If you've spent any time in the desert Southwest, after 1920 on, the water reclamation projects along the Colorado River brought in the ability to create electricity, and that electricity needed to be transported. And all across the desert Southwest, you find these towers that march all over, mostly to California early on, but then to Las Vegas and Nevada area. And after 1980, gosh, they go pretty much across the four-state area to different municipalities. Again, a beautiful shot of a rock abutment over here in the background. These four stock cars in front of us here, this is a scratch-built stock car, and these are kits that have been, in some cases, heavily modified by me to match the original cars themselves. So this kind of gives a little bit of flavor of what's going on in the South Benton area. Now we jump to a real picture of Benton, and again, I'm looking toward the south in this shot, and I see this wood gantry crane here, which I really enjoyed looking at. And as I started looking at it close up, I realized that it had what appears to be a lightning rod on the side of the gantry crane. You can't really see this here, but there is a train line that comes in underneath the gantry. There's some harp switches right here, and they would offload supplies. And again, since this is in Benton, more than likely this was for the Bodie area. So then I, of course, had to scratch built a wood gantry of similar size. I didn't do the custom ladder on this side because this is the main line right here. But you can see this gantry is located just south of the Benton stockyard area. This is a block of hay that has a tarp on it. And there's the lightning rod right there. So a neat little fun project for an afternoon. Moving south from here, we get to another area that I've done some scenic work on. This is the flip up Y. Back here in the back are those two rail lines that you were looking at. The main line is right here, spurs are right here and here. And this area is to turn engines at the south end of my layout. There's a couple of laser kit paper kits that I built here. And then I scratch built a incinerator, and a couple of guys are cooking hot dogs over here. So obviously it must be the weekend. This is what it looks like when the Y is up, and that's what it looks like when the Y is down. I need to have the Y out of play most of the time so that I can walk through this part of the layout. So the Y really only comes up when I'm going to turn steam engines. This protection shield here protects these very delicate paper models, which after I built them, it was like, I better put something over here or I'm going to take them out. Again, here's the Y in the up position. I've added a harp switch here, and that's kind of on my list of to-dos, but it gives you an idea of what the Y looks like when it's up. Plastic PVC, or I'm sorry, forget what that's called now, the plastic panels on the side, just so that don't drop an engine on the ground. Been there, done that. Models in the Hamel area have, a lot of them have been completed, but scenery's not done yet. Hamel did have a station. It was a boxcar on the ground, so there wasn't a lot going on there. And if you go south from Hamel, you get to the South Hamel Yard. This is the main line right here, and this is what I call Laws Junction. If you know anything about this line, Laws was the north end of the line for a long time, up until 1960. This point right here on the map would be about 35 miles north of Laws. So this again gives you some picturesque mountain scenery. This will be a standard SP water tank when I finish it, and a windmill here to pump water into the tank. So that pretty much ends the layout. I did this picture here just to show what was going on. Not many people remember the Mina subdivision, so I'm bringing it back into reality so that people can experience once again. So there you go. Any questions?
Yeah, Steve, how many operators during an op session?
In a 10 by 10 room, if I've got more than 2 people in there, I'm starting to get pretty crowded. So I usually have 2 people there, and then I sit on the side and run shotgun for any issues that come up. So that's pretty much how I set it up. And like I said, it's usually for about about 2 hours is what my switch lists run. Some I make a little bit more complex, and people start running in the 2.5 hour range, but I try to limit that because it just gets a little too claustrophobic and long. So that's kind of the average what I do.
What DC system do you use? DCC.
It's an NCE DCC system. It's pretty small. I don't even have a booster. I do have the ability for 2 throttles. When I really want to mix it up, I will run a train from the south end of the layout at Hamel and another one from the north end at Mina. and then everybody meets in Queen, and that's where the fun really starts. People need to jockey around and get out of the way of various trains moving through that area. But it's a lot of fun. Turns out really well.
Oh, I bet. Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. I've got about 65 kit bashed and scratch built and kit cars that I've built for the narrow gauge. So I have a lot of SP equipment that I run, but I also run standard gauge too. And I've got quite a lot of SP standard gauge that I run down at the San Diego Model Railroad Club. Any questions?
Oh,
Over
wow.
to you guys.
Thank you, Steve, very much. Make sure you look at the chat. Lots of people were commenting there about how much they enjoyed your presentation.
Well, thanks,
was
guys.
great.
I really appreciate it.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Steve. All right. So next up, we have our clinic by Robin Becker. So I'm going to find Robin in my list here and spotlight him. Hello, Robin.
Ryan,
Are you ready to roll?
I am ready. Can you see it?
Yep. Looks good.
Okay, so I'm hoping I'm not the only one that gets the joke in the title, but this is going to be a whirlwind look at various capabilities in JMRI. And if there's interest in one particular area, I'll put together something more detailed for that area in the future. My friend Bruce Morden pointed out to me, much to my surprise, that I'm on the schedule for next month. Don't know how that happened, Tim, but or maybe that's a different Robin Becker, probably. In any case, if there's questions, appreciate if you hold them to the end. We're going to go fast here. There probably will be, but hopefully everybody will get something out of this, whether you know much about JMRI or not. All right. So what is JMRI? What's supported hardware-wise, software-wise? What are the tools? That'll be the whirlwind part. How do you get started? Where do you get help? And what's beyond JMRI? And I want to thank a couple friends of mine, Ken Cameron and Rodney Black, who shared their thoughts and presentations and at least gave me a starting point when I started to think about putting this together. Nice to have friends. So what is JMRI? Well, it's a collection of software tools, and it's a powerful collection of software tools. As an engineer and developer, I can tell you there's an amazing amount of capability in the product. Everything from locomotive programming, where it started, to complete automated operation. JMRI is free and open source. What that means is no fees to use it. Developers donate their time and effort. There's a team of them. I've been a part of that team, a small part, since the very early days, going on 20 years since I brought the first JMRI sites to San Diego. Runs on almost any computer platform, supports almost all DCC systems, allows you to use your mobile handheld devices, and you can extend it. A little bit about computer systems: Windows, Mac, Linux, Raspberry Pi. That picture shows an N-scale locomotive with a Raspberry Pi 3, an RPi 3. That RPi 3 runs JMRI full up. These complaints about I don't have room in my layout room for a JMRI computer are kind of silly. You can run it on something as small as that, and that includes, that particular box has Wi-Fi to support mobile devices. What hardware does JMRI support? What hardware doesn't it support? Probably a shorter question. Here's a list, a partial list, I think, of all the DCC systems that you can interface to JMRI as long as you can connect your computer to the system. JMRI started as Decoder Pro. Really, that was the first thing. It was an idea on how to program decoders, mobile decoders in your engines, and stationary decoders trackside for turnout or signal control, and how to do that without having to know all the little details about every configuration variable, and how to do bit mapping, how to convert binary to hex to decimal, and so on. JMRI also manages your roster, supports programming on your programming track, and it also supports programming on the main. And you can run Decoder Pro. If you can get your computer and layout connected, you can run Decoder Pro. Here was the general idea. On the right, that's 8 pages from a Paragon 3 manual with CV bit mapping and other stuff. And on your left is a screenshot from Decoder Pro decoder template that handles everything on all those pages and more. And it does it with simple choices like enable, disable, directional, non-directional, ditch lights, Mars lights, gyro light, and so on, without you having to know anything about how that all happens in the decoder. You just pick what you want and go. Here's what the roster looks like once you get it set up, and you can use whatever names for your equipment are logical to you. I use the road name and road number in mine, and you can even put pictures in. I try to put prototype pictures in just for fun, and we'll see where those show up. JMRI lets you edit the roster entry itself without even being connected to a layout. You can do this with no layout connection and get things set up, or you can do programming from here. Here's a few more screenshots on how mobile decoder setup. Speed table is the one in the upper up here, and there's nice tools. If you want it to be a straight line, there's different curves we've built in. They're easy. You move the sliders, you adjust it. Over here is an example of setting up some function outputs on a complicated decoder. Again, sliders, checkboxes. And then down at the bottom is the function labels tab. And you notice that there are columns with function numbers, but next to them are text labels. And one of the things JMRI lets you do if you use its associated throttles is forget about function numbers, and we'll see that a little ways down the line here. Not just for mobile decoders, stationary decoders. I had to get a plug-in for the Quad LNS here. That's my product family that for Tam Valley Depot. And if you have sharp eyes here, you'll notice there are 16 groups. Version 3 of the Quad LNS now supports up to 16 independent servo outputs on one board. No excuse for not using servos anymore. Okay, end of shameless plug. Just a quick look at the tools. You can see throttles, turnouts, sensors, signaling, all the physical things that you might have around your layout. Consisting of locomotives is supported. Logics to do sort of little custom macros. There's a fast clock that you can have show up. In fact, it'll show up in Engine Driver if you're using that, but it'll show up on the screen. Turn the layout power on and off. There's a timetable tool. I'll show little bits of a few of those. The physical devices you can view through tables. Here's an example of what the turnout table looks like. These are LocoNet turnouts on my layout, a few of them anyway. You notice that I've given them usernames. Once you give something a username, you can forget about worrying about exactly what physical connection it has, and you can just refer to it. This is like NYD is North Yard. You can actually toggle the turnouts from the screen if you wanted to. There's some other things you can set up, feedback, similar screens for sensors, lights, and the other things you see in the list there. All visually done. So that's Decoder Pro. The next major module that came along had to do with control panels, and it's called Panel Pro. And it's visual editors so you can set up control panels. Some of them are to mimic the control panels you might find on the prototype. That's what Panel Editor and Control Panel Editor are for. Yeah, there's more than one. It's confusing. Different developers had different ideas on how a panel editor should work. So there's a rule in JMRI, code wins. If somebody goes and does something significant and it works, it gets in the package. Layout editor is a little different animal. We'll look at that too. That's really to describe your layout and its connectivity so you can do fancy things like automating it or driving signals. Here's an example of a union switch and signal control panel. Now this would be a CTC board used by a dispatcher. This is done in JMRI. Everything works on these panels. So the switches to set the turnout direction or to set the signal, clear the signal one way or the other, that would be a mouse click or a touch if it's a touch screen. The code buttons down at the bottom, the same thing. The indicators are driven from JMRI based on what the real control panels would do. There's actually a builder now in JMRI to help with this style control panel. These are a little more complex behind the scenes, but many layout owners have done control panels like this, if that's your cup of tea. My prototype used General Railway Signaling, not USS. Here's what a GRS CTC control panel looked like when they were still using mechanical switches and so on. Someone's implemented this, so that's even possible. Now those are the control panels. The layout editor, although it will make panels you can use, it, as I said, is meant to really describe and capture the physical connectivity of your layout. All those segments, the connections between them are named. They will allow the signaling system to run and train automation and other things. So this is the way you describe the physical connections in your layout to JMRI. And you can set things like what the track color looks like if the block's occupied and what the sensor is for the block and all kinds of other things. And once you get it done and running, it looks like this. And you might guess the block that's in red here, that's occupied. Those signals are live. Some of them exist physically, some of them don't. Some are just virtual signals in JMRI right now, but they're mimicking the physical ones, and the logic is all generated for you in the same. So you'll notice there's something in this block, and it's got a red over red here because the switch is set against it. But in this direction, it's got multiple clear blocks, so it's sienna green, a clear, and similar for the other signals. You can click here and throw these turnouts if you wanted to use this for control. So that's Panel Pro. Now Operations Pro. This is by far the biggest growing area in JMRI, which is amazing since really one fellow, Dan Boudreau, has been behind it. But this is as full-blown a traffic management tool and traffic generation tool as you're going to find. It's extremely configurable. You can start with all the defaults and not worry about anything, but you can tailor this so that all the moves make sense for your railroad. It generates manifests and switch lists. We'll look at those. Manages your car roster, all the locations where you can set out or pick up cars on your layout, the routes and trains travel, and you can even put in more esoteric stuff like horsepower for ton requirements so that it assigns enough locomotives to your train based on how long you're making the train. Another one of these things, it doesn't need a layout connection. If you just wanted to use this for traffic management on your layout, you could do that. You wouldn't even have to be connected. I show these screens only to show the degree of configurability. Like I said, when you start, you take all the defaults, you don't even worry about this, but you can set infinite control here almost on what local moves can do, what's enabled, what's not enabled. You can set what cars can go. This is a train, and look at the control you have over the type of car that train is going to handle and the towns it's going to service along the way, all configurable. Here's the top table, shows how you set locations up on your layout. So this layout happens to have Bakersfield, Danville, and so on. There's a description given to each layout location, number of spots, the length, and there's a little report showing what's there and what's due for work at that spot. On the bottom, you can see the car roster or part of the car roster for this layout. You create your cars, you can put in road numbers, they can be real. If you're in Z-scale, you don't have to use the real road numbers if you don't use them. I would say N, but I'm an N and I plan to use road numbers. A lot of people don't. It just, you find a blue box car and you're close enough. But configuring your roster, then you set up your trains. What trains do I want to run? Where do they go? Approximately when do they run? That's your train list. And then you set up a schedule on what days each train runs. You can let them all run every day. You don't do whatever makes sense to you. And when you have everything all set and ready to go, you click build, one of these buttons, and based on all the rules you set up for your spots and the places that train's going to go and how big you let it to be and the cars that are available, it will then create that train and its work. And there's two ways to look at this. So first, there's a switch list. A switch list is a location specific list of all the work for this operating session for the trains that are built. This particular location is Bakersfield, and this list shows every train that's coming in and the work it's going to do. And it might, if there's local work for a yard master, it'll show that too. And on the other side of the screen is a manifest. A manifest is the work list for a particular train. So this is the work list for train BLX, and you can see it. First block is for Bakersfield with some check boxes. Then it skips. You can see that this train had no work at 4 towns, and then it shows up at Lakeview and it has a bunch more work. There's nice ways to print these. You can customize them to your layout, put logos in the printouts and so on. But if you're into printed paperwork, it'll generate that for you. Now, if you want to do electronic paperwork, Operations Pro has a conductor window. And now we're looking at a screen on the computer for the conductor that shows one location, this case, Bakersfield. It shows everything he needs to do at Bakersfield. He has check boxes that he can check as they're completed. When they're completed, I should say he or she, sorry. When they're completed, you click on move, and then JMRI is updated with all the location changes. It knows what's in your train at that point, what's not in your train. Then you click next location and you're on to Port Arthur, and it will show you the list at Port Arthur. We'll come back to this. You can show you the power. JMRI also has internal throttles, so you can create a throttle right on your computer screen and run a train. Here's what a throttle looks like when it first comes up. No labels on the function buttons, you notice, but I do get to pick the engine from my roster if I want to. So I just come in here and click on 117, and you'll see I get 117, and now magically all the function buttons are labeled with the function names that I set way back when in that roster entry for 117. So it doesn't really matter if rail click is F13, F2, F147. If you want to hear rail click, you just click on the button that says rail click, which is sort of the spirit of the whole thing. One throttle's not enough for you. Here's 4. You could fit more on the screen, maybe not on a PowerPoint screen, but you could fit more on your screen, as many throttles really as you want. Now, when you're trying to run trains, it's kind of nice to know that they're not going to have cornfield meets. And there's a diagram we use to help with that called a string line diagram. Many, many years ago, I coded this up, a string line diagram in Excel, and published that. And it's on, I think the link's still on my website. But this tool is nicer. You sort of enter, time goes along the x-axis, and position along the layout goes on the y-axis. You start as first town is alpha, the last town's omega. And this shows different trains running in each direction and shows where they meet. Now, when they meet in a town like this, that's a good thing. If they ever meet out here in between towns head on, that's a bad thing. You need to go back and adjust your schedule to fit. So string line diagram is now built in, a handy tool. which leads into the last of the major tools in JMRI, and that's Dispatcher Pro. And this gets into coordinating the operation of the trains on your layout and optionally automating the running of trains. So it can go from making the dispatcher's job easier to fully automating trains. And you don't have to automate every train. So if you're running the layout yourself and you're doing some local switching and you want a through train to go by, so you have to get out of the way periodically, you can do that. If you don't have enough operators or some trains just run right over the layout and everybody has to clear those, you could automate those in running and leave the operations to the trains that have switching. Just a real brief overview here of the idea. On the bottom, Dispatcher works with transits. Transits are a way to get from point A to point B, and you set those up, and then it assigns those to a train as it thinks is appropriate, reserves those, the signals go accordingly, and then the train moves or it is moved by your crew. Of course, there are reports and visualizations into what's happening on the layout. Here, there's a couple of trains running. There's a couple of trains waiting to be enabled to run. And then it shows you the pieces of the layout, the allocated sections, and what train they're allocated to. And then here's a combination of a Dispatcher Pro screen running a layout, and then a view of the layout itself. That's a layout editor panel. That happens to be Steve Todd's layout. And there's a train active on the layout, and it's being run. And you can see it up here, and it's running in automatic mode. And then there's a train that's set and waiting for the dispatcher to say go. So everything sort of plays together. So let's take a quick look at the wireless tools. You know, in the old days, we all used throttles from our GCC manufacturer, and then we started realizing we could do maybe something better or a little more user-friendly and use devices we already had, like our cell phones or tablets, or maybe pick up a $20 cell phone online and use that as a throttle. I used to demonstrate that when I was doing engine driver clinics. These devices need Wi-Fi connections, but you do not need a cell connection. So you can use old cell phones you have around that no longer have a contract on them. They work perfectly well as throttles. There's two parts to this. One is in JMRI, one is running throttles, and the other is just showing screens on your web browser. So we'll take a look at what you might use both of those for. Here's what the commonly available throttles look like. For Android, we have Engine Driver. I'm one of the developers of this application. Engine Driver is open source, part of the JMRI universe. So it's free and runs on almost all Android devices. Again, you'll see we get labeled buttons for functions. So you don't have to remember anything. You pick your engine from the roster, just like I showed you before. You can have up to 3 throttles on one screen. Here I have 2, but I haven't assigned anything. And I've also have basically a browser window here, and I'm showing a panel, that control panel I showed you before, a little piece of it on my layout on the bottom. Over here is Y throttle. That runs on Apple devices. The intro version of it's free. I think the full featured version of it costs you a big $10. So that's actually a commercial product, does the same kind of thing. Now, what about if you just want to look at panels in a browser or do some work in a browser? Let's say you want to use a tablet. Well, you can do that. And if you point your browser, you have JMRI running and it's running the web server, and you point your browser at it, and here's just an address, just like any other thing on the web. This is the opening screen you get. And you'll notice that it's got throttles. Shows you the windows that are open in JMRI. It'll let you get to panels, your roster, various operations. You can do all this from a browser interface, which gets interesting when it gets to panels and operations. So we'll look at a couple examples. If I open a throttle in the web browser, I get this really wonderful looking roster screen to pick an engine from. So I can go ahead and just click on one of those in my browser. Again, the browser could be on a computer, could be a tablet, could be on a phone. And I get a web throttle. So here's another option for a throttle. You don't even have to have engine driver or Y throttle. You can just use a browser and pull up throttles or a couple throttles or a couple more throttles. You can have a control panel for your layout on a tablet. Now, this is a panel I did for Don Mitchell's layout, and it happens to be for the branch, which, by the way, Jack always chose when he had a choice to run it. He loved going off on the branch. And this panel at Don's layout is on a very inexpensive tablet that's attached to the lighting valence over the branch, and you just click on the circles to control the turnouts as you are working that job. Pretty easy. All run by JMRI. Now here's one, if you hadn't seen it, it might surprise you. This is a photo from Bob Buckaloo's layout at Control Point Portage East. This is viewed on the browser. It's not a live screenshot, but the signals are live. So it's a photograph he took, and the engineer carries this tablet or his phone with him, and when he gets to this location, that's showing the signals. Even if the signals on the layout aren't even installed or animated, these are live. And as the train moves to the next location, you click on this green arrow and it takes you to the next location, Quaker Junction, and so on. So it gives away, let's say the signals weren't visible from the aisle, or you hadn't implemented physical signals, you can still have signaling. Remember before when we looked at operations, we saw that conductor report and it was on the main computer, and you say, well, that's nice, but when I'm working my trains, I'm not at my computer. Well, here's the conductor report on a mobile device looked at in a browser. And this browser could be on a tablet, it could be on your phone. In fact, it could be an engine driver. You could be running the train and then switch to the browser screen, go over, see what your work is, go back to the throttle, do some work, come back here, check off what you did. And when you're done, just like before, you say, I'm done with this, take me to the next town. So here is your full manifest with no paper, if you wanted it, on your phone. If you're using your phone as a throttle anyway, no extra thing to carry around. You can still do this just by the browser capability. All right, briefly look how to get started. If there's anybody here, I would have taken a poll. I don't know how easy that is. If there's people here that don't run JMRI regularly or are interested in it, but to get started, you go to jmri.org and you download the software. You'll also have to download and install Java, and as we saw, it'll run just about any computer, any layout. Then you got to connect your layout to your computer somehow. If you have a command station like this with a USB connector, you can plug that into your computer. This Lens command station also has a USB connector. This NCE has a serial connector, so we use one of these. It's a USB to serial dongle, and then you plug the USB plug into your computer and you are now connected to your layout. For some Digitrax layouts, there are also interfaces directly to LocalNet. You don't have to go through the command station. If your command station is older and doesn't have a USB connector, you can use a PR4 as just a layout interface, or you can get this device, local buffer USB from Railroad Circuits, and one side connects to LocalNet and the other side has a USB and connects your computer, and you're good to go. At that point, you've got to tell your computer where the layout connection is. So you go to the connections screen and you say, I've got a Digitrax layout. My command station's a 240. It's connected to COM5, and pretty soon you're up and running. 50% of the pain is getting this right. Once people get this right, then you're having fun. You don't have to have an actual layout connection. You can say my connection is Digitrax, but it's a simulated interface. And then you can do everything you could do if you had a layout. You could create your turnouts and throw them. You could draw your panels. You could actually move trains around a simulated version of your layout and test things out. So if you're offline, you're not connected, your layout's down, you're out of town, you can still play around with things. And you can have multiple connections at the same time. I've supported a number of clubs that use NCE for their engine control for their DCC bus, but they've added quad LNs, which are LocalNet devices, to do all their turnouts and signals. So you can have NCE and you can have LocalNet and you can have CMRI and you can have SPROG all there at the same time. JMRI can handle it. And when you have multiple layout connections, you simply tell it. If I had SPROG here, if I was using SPROG for my service track because it handles sound decoders really well, I would just come in here, there'd be a line for SPROG, and I'd say, set the service programmer to SPROG and set everything else to LocalNet. No problem. You can do it all at the same time. It's pretty cool. You can keep all your files on your computer, or you can keep them up in the cloud, or you keep them wherever you want. You tell JMRI. In my case, all my files are up here in OneDrive. They're in the cloud. I run JMRI on lots of computers at home. Like probably 4 computers have JMRI, and I run one on my workbench, one on the layout, one for testing. They all share the same configurations, same panel, same everything. And lastly, if you're using JMRI for different things, you can have different profiles. And so I've got profiles to run Digitrax in different ways. Sometimes someone sends me a panel from their NCE layout and they want me to debug it. So I can run NCE in simulated mode and run their panel and see what's going on. I can run a backrest speedometer. I can run SPROGs in 2 different modes. You just switch profiles and start. And if you're totally lost, here's 3 ways to get help. The first one is jmri.org. There is so much detailed help description now on the main website. It's pretty extensive. You can often find what you need there. If not, here's the official support group. It's JMRI users on groups.io. There are over 10,000 active members there now, including all the developers. Now, all the developers don't monitor the user community conversations 100% of the time, but most do most of the time. So often if you have a really complicated problem, you'll get the developer will jump in and help you. And if you love Facebook, someone started a Facebook group, it's already up to 2,000 plus members. All right, lastly, if JMRI doesn't do exactly what you want, but it comes close, you can make it do exactly what you want because there's a built-in programming language, and that programming language gets full access to all the objects you've created, sensors, turnouts, signals. So you can press a button and set all the signals on your layout to red, or you can press a button and just line all this mainline turnout straight. If you, let's say you're doing open house, and lock out the controls, or you could even, and people have done this, program scripts to run their trains just the way they wanted to do them. Most users won't get into this, but it's there if anybody wanted to do it. And you can create a custom interface. So just to show you what you might do, here's something I worked on the last couple weeks. This is a script to run my test track. I have a test track with stopping blocks at each end, and I like to run locomotives back and forth. But beyond that, I like to know how fast they're going at different percent throttle settings so I can trim my speed tables. And it's a short test track, so I needed to sort of factor in a bunch of things like how long does the detector take to pick up and drop out, and what's the wheelbase of the locomotive. So I coded this all up And this gives you this nice user interface screen, and it lets me get at a throttle and pick the engine, and I can turn sound on and off or do other things. And let me show you what that looks like. Here's the test track on the bottom. The engine up over here is sitting on the test track at the starting point. Here's the application. Let's click start and see what happens. So we're going to run till it hits the stopping block. The script will stop it. It computed the speed, showed you the forward speed. Now it's running it backwards. When it gets to the stopping block at the other end, it'll stop the engine, compute the speed, and then continue on with the next cycle in the process. So fun for me as a programmer. I think it's cool. You can have your own opinions. And if you really want to see somebody who's gone to town, Rodney Blacks just did an amazing thing. He wanted a modern dispatcher control panel. It's called a Digicon, and you can see what it looks like there. And it was not easy to do in JMRI, and he didn't think the control panel tools were intuitive. He created his own application, Computer Automated Train System, CATS. He has a huge following. There are a tremendous number of users that use this. It runs on all computers, just like JMRI. In fact, it ties into JMRI, so it gets data from the JMRI operations database, and it's a full-blown application in and of itself that a developer decided to do and then share with everyone. Just amazing. Almost no limits. Okay, I hope that was interesting, at least in part, to everybody. It's a quick overview, admittedly, on a complicated subject. If there's time, Ryan, I'm happy to take some questions. If somebody identifies, if there's some consensus on an area that merits further investigation, then I am happy to try to put something together.
I've got a quick question, Robin. This is Chuck Hart.
Hi, Chuck.
How you doing? Where did you find the string line panel in JMRI? Is that under operations?
I believe it's the timetable tool.
Okay, I'll look for that.
Okay. And by the way, I have to say this in light of today, and it is so nice to have so many old friends online today. People I've known forever, Gary Robinson and Ron and others. Good to have friends around.
Thank you.
Robin, I have a question about how important is it to update Java with JMRI?
Yeah, Gene, it's a great question. I've forgotten what the minimum Java version requirement is for JMRI, but obviously you have to meet that. Like most applications, large applications, there's a constant stream of development, and it's not necessary to get test releases, but I certainly recommend staying with the major releases as they come out. There are security fixes, but bug fixes, security fixes, other things, but it isn't necessary to have every test release of Java.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And I agree with you. It's great to see the friends today.
Amen, Gene.
We need this.
Yeah, we saw you in Kansas City. Maybe we'll see you in wherever we are next year.
St. Louis.
St. Louis, right. Meet me in St. Louis.
You got it. It's a deal.
Thank you so much, Robin. But there's so many things in there I thought I knew a lot about JMRI, but I had no idea about. That was very cool. Thank you.
Ryan, I want to know when you're going to apply all of this knowledge now to your JMRI system.
Oh, boy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, Robin, let me ask you a question. Are you saying JMRI can knows the speed of your locomotive without having some kind of speedometer on your layout?
Okay, so that test track, Mike, is I enter the length of the track and it has a stopping block at each end. So there's a detector at each end that hooks in to JMRI, and JMRI knows when that detector says the stopping block's occupied and when it's not occupied. And so JMRI times the locomotive between those two blocks. And since I've told it how long the blocks are, and I've told it something about how the detectors behave, and I told it what scale I'm in, it can calculate the scale speed.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Well, my script does that. The Python programming language gives me the capability to do all that, and JMRI supports that programming. Now, when you're out running trains and automate, let me just say, Ryan, sorry.
No way. Go ahead. Go ahead.
When you're running automated operations, there's all kinds of stuff on speed, and you can have speed-based signaling, or you can have speed profiles on your trains and engines, and JMRI can do things in operations like do a station stop for you. So if you have a station that's in the middle of a block, JMRI can figure out how to slow your train down from the time it enters that block so it stops more or less at that station. So there are, yes, all kinds of things like that are possible.
That's amazing. I knew, I'm new to the hobby, and I knew JMRI did a lot of things. I didn't realize how robust it was. Wow.
Right. So that's 20 years of development by a team of people that put heart and soul into their own parts of it. And yeah, and we all reap the benefits collectively.
Thank you.
Hey, Robin, another question. Does Chris Thompson from Arizona, by the way, does JMRI interface with LCC hardware?
Yeah, actually there is an LCC interface, and there's the LCC group is the best place to get support for that. But yeah, there are tools and device interfaces so you can use JMRI with your LCC system.
Awesome, thanks.
Sure.
Robin, this is Tim.
Hi, Tim.